On that frigid November night, the wind howled through the elegant streets of Beacon Hill, making the windows of the Collins mansion shudder. Inside, the smell of expensive candles mingled with the muffled sound of crying from upstairs. In the twins' dark room, Harper and Haley shivered under the linen sheets, clinging to stuffed animals that no longer brought comfort. Her sunken eyes, surrounded by dark circles, seemed to scream for something that no one heard. They hadn't slept in weeks, and no one knew what else to do. Downstairs, in silence, a woman in a simple uniform and calloused hands folded sheets in the corner of the laundry room. Beautiful. No one paid attention to her, but she heard everything, and he did. Every muffled tear, every stifled scream, every silence laden with longing. In his eyes there was something that others did not see. Recognition, similar pain, memory of a loss that still lived inside her. How many women have held on tight to their own pain to take care of the pain of others? What Linda didn't know was that, in that house where science had already given up, she would be the last hope. Because sometimes it is in the silence of a cleaning lady that the answer that the whole world forgot to hear lives. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. 3 weeks after Linda set foot in that house, a hidden camera recorded a scene that made the powerful William Collins drop the wine glass he was holding. For the first time in months, there was no screaming or sobbing, just a whisper in Spanish, soft as prayer, and the reflection of a soft light dancing on the forgotten doll in the corner of the room. The twins were sleeping, in peace. But what really happened there? What had that invisible woman in a worn uniform and a serene look done to the millionaire's daughters? Or could it be that deep down, it just undid what so many doctors caused? Before continuing, I need to ask you something from the heart. If this story has ever touched something inside you, if you have ever felt small in a world that did not listen to you, leave your like and subscribe. This gesture, for many people, is just a button. But for women like Linda, and so many others, it's a sign that they're not alone, that someone on the other side still believes in the power of truth, care, and courage of those who no one sees. The agency's black car pulled up in front of the Collins mansion on a cloudy late afternoon, when the Boston sky seemed to carry the same weight on her chest that Linda carried on her shoulders. She came down with her worn-out suitcase, a borrowed coat, and her eyes downcast, not out of embarrassment but out of weariness, the kind of tiredness that is not cured with sleep but with peace. He rang the doorbell with trembling fingers, and before he could adjust the handkerchief in his hair, the door opened with a dry crack. The housekeeper looked her up and down and said only, "Punctual. You can come in." The hall of the mansion was a frozen work of art. Everything there seemed to scream wealth. Chandeliers of French crystal, waxed floors that reflected like mirrors, curved staircases wrapped in gilded banisters. But what Linda felt when she entered was not dazzlement. It was cold, a cold that did not come from the air conditioning but from an absence of soul, of laughter, of human warmth. She knew how to recognize this. It was the same kind of silence that remained in her home when she buried her daughter years ago. Since then, no room, no matter how clean, could house her joy. Led to the renovated basement, Linda saw the space where she would sleep. A thin mattress, a narrow window, and the constant hum of the heating system. No luxury, but she thanked him in silence. There would be a roof over their heads, and there would be work. And for those who have already lost everything, that was a lot. On the first day, he started with the library. The books were dusty, although arranged to the millimeter. The bookshelves seemed to have not been touched in years. Over the fireplace, a large photograph framed in silver drew attention. William Collins, his late wife Amanda, and the 2 twin girls, smiling in a flowery field, with white dresses and hair blowing in the wind. Linda paused in front of the image for a few seconds. Something in that photo hurt, perhaps because of the absence of truth, or for the cruel contrast with what he would see in the royal corridors of that house. On the second floor, the girls' rooms looked like a catalogue. Light curtains, organized toys, themed pillows. But there was something strange. No sound could be heard. No childish laughter, no stumbling, no request for a lap. The doors remained closed, even during the day. The nanny, always wearing headphones, seemed to be working a mechanical shift, like someone who takes care of an aquarium, and not two living children. As she passed the floor cloth in front of the door of the twins' room, Linda heard a muffled sob, stopped. The instinct was to open, knock, ask. But he held back. It was not time. Not yet. In the dining room, the silver cutlery was laid, but no one ate with it. William dined alone in the office, in front of economic reports and news. The children's food was served at strict times, always cold, with supplements recommended by specialists. The doctor of the house, a tall, elegant, and impersonal woman, gave instructions as if she were talking about machines. No physical contact. Keep the routine. No emotional stimuli. While cleaning the luxurious bathrooms, Linda saw huge bathtubs with hydro-massage jets, imported masks and embroidered towels, and she remembered the day she washed her own daughter's body in a plastic bucket during the flood. That came like a knife. And as she rubbed the white marble hard, she cried silently, with her face turned to the wall. In the laundry, where the smell of fabric softener mixed with the dust of the days, she began to find small signs: unused children's clothes, new shoes still in boxes, toys without batteries. Everything there seemed ready, but lifeless, like a showcase setting. On the third day, while vacuuming in the hallway upstairs, a door opened, and there was Haley, one of the twins, standing there with huge eyes, hugging a dirty teddy bear. He said nothing. He just stared, eyes as tired as Linda's. A second later, the babysitter appeared and pulled the girl back as if she had done something wrong. The door closed, but that gaze stuck to the cleaning lady's chest like a needle. At night, on the mattress in the basement, Linda did not sleep. The sound of the heating system made the walls shake slightly. She looked up at the ceiling and felt that this house was heartbroken, and that the girls, as surrounded by luxury, were as invisible as she was. She thought of her daughter, in the pain of having lost what he loved most. And there, in a split second, he made a silent decision. He would not turn his back. There are pains that only those who have lived it recognize in the other. There are silences that scream. And there are people who, even without a degree, understand more about soul than many specialists. If this touched you, if you've also seen someone suffer in silence and wanted to do something, comments below. I believe. I've lived it. It touched me. Every word can be a shelter for those who need it. The next morning, Linda went back to the girls' room to clean up. The door was ajar. On the floor, a crumpled drawing with 3 figures, 2 children and a woman, with her hair tied up holding a broom. But what caught her attention the most was what was written in the corner of the page, with crooked letters. Can you stay? But she had no idea who else had seen that paper, nor of what was about to happen when the wrong hands found that message. William Collins went down the stairs every morning with the precision of a Swiss watch. Impeccable white shirt, dark suit, indecipherable face. The leather shoes hit the marble floor with a firmness that imposed silence. Everything about it was calculation. The time to leave, the coffee without sugar, the drawer with the contracts. Since Amanda died, he has turned the pain into routine and his daughters into an equation that needed to be solved. With reports, medicines, and protocols, there was no room for failure nor for feelings. He paid for the best, and he demanded results. But that day, when he saw the children's drawing thrown on the floor and Linda's presence in the girls' room, his gaze froze for a second, just for a second. Then he deflected, ignored, like someone who deletes an error in a report. Dr. Evelyn Carter arrived shortly after. Tall, slender, dressed in discreet designer clothes, her blonde hair tied in an impeccable bun. She was respected in academia, an author of articles on childhood trauma, and a consultant for private clinics. But there in that house, she behaved as absolute authority. He walked like someone who commands. He spoke like someone who does not accept a reply. And it was with this tone that she looked at Linda for the first time, a look that mixed contempt with discomfort, as if the presence of that simple woman, with a serene posture and a strong accent, threatened something that Evelyn could not explain. In the second-floor corridor, the two crossed paths in silence. Evelyn held a clipboard. Beautiful, a bucket of warm water. The doctor stopped, analyzed her from top to bottom and said dryly, "Avoid direct contact with children. They are in sensitive treatment." Linda just nodded with a slight shake of her head. But inside, something was already pulsating. It wasn't pride. It was a kind of instinct that life gave him, to recognize when someone uses science to silence rather than heal. In Harper's room, the smell of medicine was stronger than that of toys. The girl, pale, was sitting on the bed with her eyes lost in the window. Linda entered slowly, only to vacuum the carpet. He didn't speak. He didn't invade, but he watched. And in silence, he saw more than any diagnosis could record. He saw the plate untouched on the table, the wet pajamas on the floor, and the cushions stained with tears. And he saw, once again, the look called for help, until a scream cut through the room. "How many times have I told you not to wet the bed, Harper? You need to react! React!" Evelyn shouted, locking the room behind Linda's back. The girl trembled, clinging to the pillow. "If it continues like this, we will need to increase the dosage. This is not a pity hotel, it's serious treatment." The child's eyes filled with water, and Linda, who was outside with the vacuum cleaner turned off, felt her whole body freeze. She didn't want to, but the voice came out. "Dr. Carter, excuse me, maybe she just needs to comfort." The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. Evelyn opened the door stiffly, her face red with disguised anger. "Are you interrupting me, employee? Do you have any medical training? I'm a neuropsychiatrist. What are you, sheet washer? So keep doing it. And one more thing, don't interfere with the treatment." Linda lowered her eyes, not out of fear, but out of restraint. "I knew that in houses like this, it only takes one word out of place for the back door to open, and you leave with the bag in your hand." But inside, his heart was beating out of step. It wasn't just anger. It was impotence, because anyone who has ever lost a child knows exactly the difference between rebellion and suffering. William witnessed the scene from a distance. He heard everything, but he remained silent. Sitting in the office armchair, his eyes glued to the computer, he pretended it was just another common friction between female employees. After all, he paid well to make everything work. No noise, no conflicts. But on that day, the silence was more deafening than ever. At night, Linda went downstairs as if carrying stones on her back. He washed his uniform by hand, spread it on the heater, and lay down on the thin mattress. The noise of the heating system was like heavy breathing. She didn't cry. He just stood there with his eyes open, remembering his daughter, remembering when he also heard that she needed to react, remembering the day she didn't wake up anymore. The sound of rapid footsteps cut across the hallway. Someone ran. Someone was crying. Linda stood up, alert. He climbed the steps slowly until he heard a light knock coming from the upstairs bathroom. As he approached, he saw Harper sitting on the cold floor, huddled next to the toilet, her eyes red and her pajamas still wet. The child looked at her, startled, and whispered, "I'm sorry." The word that no child should carry. But what Linda didn't know was that at that very moment, Evelyn was watching everything from afar, with her arms crossed and her jaw locked, and that for a woman like her, compassion was seen as a threat. The question now was no longer whether she would act, but when would she try to silence that cleaning lady for good? The attic of the Collins mansion was a forgotten room, filled with sealed boxes, old blankets, and the strong smell of wood stored for decades. No one went up there often. It was out of the route of doctors, employees, and even children. But to Linda, all that dust seemed to have something to say. "As I cleaned the corners carefully, I felt that the past of that house still breathed inside, in forgotten objects and stories swallowed by silence. In one of the open boxes next to Amanda's old books, she found something that made her stop. A dirty brown teddy bear with torn stitching and a flower-shaped brooch attached to her ear. It was stained, abandoned, but still whole, as if it had resisted something big. Linda held that bear gently, as if holding a living memory, and went down with it hidden inside her coat. Hours later, while changing the sheets in the girls' rooms, she waited for the right moment to ask. Sitting on the floor with Harper, pretending to arrange the toys, she showed the bear and asked softly, "Is this yours?" The girl, in an almost imperceptible gesture, widened her eyes. He touched the bear with his slender fingers and murmured, as if confessing a secret, "It was Mommy's." "Udit." And then, without warning, he cried in silence. Not a cry of scandal, but that kind of lament that only an orphaned child knows. Linda said nothing. He just ran his finger through the girl's hair, as he did with his own daughter before she left. There was no rush, there was no medical rule, there was presence. That night, when everyone was asleep, Linda sat in the corner of the basement with thread and needle in her hands. He patiently sewed the tear of the bear, wiped the stained cloth with damp cloth and lavender, and left the polished brooch as good as new. He wrote a note by hand, in simple but firm handwriting. "She still takes care of you, just in a different way." She went up the stairs barefoot with silent steps and left the bear on Harper's pillow. She took a deep breath, closed the door, and went down again, her heart tight as if she had given a part of it along with that gift. The next morning the house was enveloped in a strange peace. The sun came in timidly through the living room windows, the employees whispered. William read the newspaper, as usual, but there was something different in the air. When Linda went upstairs to clean the girls' room, she found Harper asleep, sleeping for real. His eyes closed, his body relaxed, the bear in his arms. Next to the bed, the nanny held the phone in shock. "She slept for 2 hours straight," he said, his eyes wide. It was the first time in weeks that this had happened. Evelyn ran upstairs, hastily summoned. She entered the room, as if she were the mistress of peace that reigned there. When he saw the bear in the girl's arms and the note next to it, he grabbed both with the tips of his fingers, as if manipulating evidence of crime. "Read." He frowned. "Coincidence, an expected emotional reaction to an object of attachment," she said loudly, as if she needs to reassert her control so as not to be swallowed up by such a simple gesture. He ignored the sparkle on the girl's face, ignored the silence without crying. He ignored everything. Linda watched the scene from the hallway with the floor cloth in her hands. He didn't answer, he didn't rebut, but inside her, something lit up. It wasn't anger. It was certainty. The certainty that that house did not need any more medicine. I needed memory, of affection, of people who could see beyond the visible pain. At the end of the day, William passed by the room, watched his daughter sleep with the bear on her chest, and stopped for a few seconds. His eyes showed no emotion, but his hand trembled as he closed the door. He said nothing. But something about that man of steel was quietly beginning to rust. Linda went down to the lighter basement. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the box where she kept her daughter's photos. He touched one of them with his fingers and whispered, "Today, I took care of another girl for you." He closed his eyes. For the first time since he arrived, he felt he was in the right place. But upstairs, in the dark wood-clad office, Evelyn Carter was arguing on the phone. His voice was low but full of irritation. "This woman is getting too close. I want them to install cameras. Today, discreetly." The question that echoed in the background of the call seemed simple, but it carried venom. What is this cleaning lady really doing to the girls? The next morning, Linda would walk upstairs with the bucket of cleaning products balanced in her left hand and a damp cloth running between her right fingers. The corridors, as always, were silent, that silence that was not one of peace, but of restraint, of unsaid things, locked feelings, swallowed words. When she entered Harper's room, she found the note she had carefully written the night before, crumpled on the floor, next to the teddy bear with the brooch. The air was heavy, and before she could put the paper together, Evelyn walked in without knocking. Unauthorized emotional interference. The words came out of the doctor's mouth like icy blades. She picked up the note, read it aloud disdainfully, and pointed her finger at Linda. "You are not a psychologist, nor a therapist. You're a cleaner, and she was not hired to get involved in the treatment of children." William appeared in the hallway, attracted by the high tone of voice. He looked at the scene, expressionless. Evelyn crossed her arms and, without waiting for a response, added, "This could compromise months of treatment. I recommend measures." William remained silent for a few seconds. Then he took a deep breath and replied, "Install cameras. I want everything monitored, for safety." Linda felt the floor disappear. Not because of the fear of the camera, but because of its meaning. It was not enough to be invisible. Now she would be watched. Trust that never existed had officially turned into surveillance. She continued her work quietly, but the heart was in pieces. The only reason he didn't cry was because he learned a long time ago that a poor man's tear has no audience, and no one there would care what she felt. Later that day, while mopping down the second-floor hallway, Haley quietly approached. The girl held a folded paper with small, shy hands. He handed it to the cleaning lady as if handing over a treasure. Linda knelt down and opened it carefully. It was a drawing. 3 figures holding hands. One had a bun in her hair, the other 2 had colorful bows. Above, a sun with a heart in the center, and underneath, written in children's lyrics, "I like you." Linda couldn't speak. He just pressed the paper to his chest and smiled. That was more than a gift. It was a request to stay, but the sweetness of that moment would not last. Evelyn emerged behind, her heels hitting the wooden floor like a judge's gavel. He saw the drawing and took it from Linda's hand quickly. He looked disdainfully and turned to the child. "You're regressing, Haley. This is not healthy." And before the girl's frightened eyes, he tore the paper in half. 1, 2, 3 pieces on the floor. Haley let out a sob that she could barely contain. Linda held her arm lightly, trying to calm her down, but inside, the revolt was like a silent fire. Evelyn left as if nothing had happened, but he didn't notice something. Right above the door, in the corner of the doorframe, one of the newly installed cameras was filming everything. That night, Linda couldn't sleep. The noise of the heating system seemed louder than ever. The sheet scratched his skin. The weight on his back was not physical. It was moral. He began to wonder if it still made sense to stay there. If not, it was better to leave, before she was accused of something bigger. After all, in that house even kindness became a problem. She sat on the edge of the mattress, turned on the dim light and stared at the cement wall with her eyes watering. He thought about everything he had experienced, in the daughter he lost, in the husband who did not return, in the world that never knew how to support a woman like her. How many times did she have to swallow the pain so as not to bother her? How many times did you shut up so as not to lose the little you had? She followed in silence, carrying that weight that no one saw. And if you're following this story right now, feeling touched by all this, leave a like and subscribe. It is the most beautiful way to show that this pain has not gone unnoticed. It's like saying to Linda, even if in silence, "I see you." The next morning, something changed. Harper and Haley greeted her with shy hugs. They didn't say anything, but his gestures spoke. Linda got the message. She couldn't leave. They needed her. Not because of the cleaning, but because inside he was the only person who still saw 2 children, where everyone saw only one clinical case. She stood up decisively. He would stay. But little did she imagine that at that moment, Evelyn had already accessed the first recordings of the cameras. And what she was about to discover would change everything. It was nearly midnight when the biting silence of the Collins mansion was shattered by a high-pitched scream from the second floor. It wasn't just any sound. It was the kind of cry that comes from within, from where nameless fear lives. Linda, already lying on the thin mattress in the basement, jumped to her feet. He didn't even put on his shoes. She climbed the stairs with her heart racing, guided by the echo of a dread she knew all too well. No babysitter showed up, no professionals, just dark hallways and locked doors. When he pushed open the door to Haley's room, he found the girl in the fetal position, drenched in sweat, shaking all over. Her eyes rolled in panic, as if looking for something that was no longer there. "Mom, Mom," she repeated between sobs, clinging to the sheet as if he could bring her back. Linda didn't think about protocols. He did not think of orders. He just knelt on the ground and wrapped his arms around her. The girl resisted at first, squirming, but then, as if recognizing in that touch something lost long ago, she gave in. He buried his face in the cleaning lady's chest and cried. Linda began to rock it slowly, back and forth, as she had done with her daughter years ago during feverish nights. And then, in a low, trembling voice, he began to sing. It was an old Spanish lullaby, passed down from mother to daughter for generations. Duérmete, mi niña, duérmete ya. The melody floated in the air like a silk thread, enveloping the room, calming the ghosts. Gradually, the crying subsided. The shaking ceased. Haley snuggled in Linda's lap, as if she had finally found the nest she never had after the loss of her mother. And there, in that instant, in that room full of cameras and fears, something was born that no medicine had ever been able to offer: shelter. William, attracted by the screams, stopped before the half-open door. He watched the scene in silence. His eyes, always so dry, took time to understand what they were seeing. A cleaning lady, barefoot, with her uniform crumpled, holding her daughter as if she were her own. And the girl sleeping peacefully, something that not even the best doctors had achieved. He didn't get in. He didn't. He just closed the door carefully and went down the stairs, with slow steps, as if carrying a doubt on his shoulders. The next day, Evelyn watched the camera footage with a stiff face. She saw it all. The scream, Linda's ascent, the hug, the song, the girl falling asleep. And she felt something that even she couldn't name right away. It was anger, yes, but mixed with fear. Fear of losing control. Fear that their authority would be replaced by something much simpler and more powerful: true affection. He got up from his chair, went to William's office, and said bluntly, "This woman needs to be dismissed immediately. It is interfering with treatment, invading functions, exceeding limits." William did not respond immediately. He stared at the extinguished fireplace with his elbows resting on his knees. After a few seconds, he muttered, "She just hugged her." Evelyn didn't like the tone. "That's not how trauma is treated, William. Not with lullabies, not with impromptu hugs. She doesn't know what she's doing." The millionaire stood up, walked to the window, and said without turning his face, "Maybe no one here knows." The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. Evelyn got the message, but he did not accept. He returned to his room with the eyes of a sentence. He passed Linda in the hallway without looking, as if she were a piece of furniture. The silent war had begun, and now it was no longer about methods or hierarchies. It was about who would have access to the hearts of those children. That night, Linda stayed up late, not for fear of being sent away, but for something deeper. Haley's body heat still seemed to vibrate in her arms, the smell of her hair, the sound of sighing when she fell asleep. Everything was still there, stuck in his skin. She felt that, somehow, her lost daughter had guided her to that moment, as if to say, "You didn't save me, but you can still save someone." And it was in this certainty that she silently promised that she would not abandon those girls, not even if the whole world said she couldn't stay. But what Linda didn't know, the next day, the Collins family's board of guardians would be hastily convened, and among the documents to be delivered, there was something written in cold and heartless letters. Possible inappropriate behavior of an employee. Recommend immediate shutdown. In the quiet dawn of the Collins mansion, when even the echoes seemed to have fallen asleep, Linda walked down the basement stairs barefoot, feeling the chill of the floor as a reminder that there, in that forgotten corner of the house, was where she belonged, at least in everyone's eyes. He sat on the edge of the mattress, his body exhausted from the day, but his soul still in shock. What had happened to Haley that night? That had stirred parts of her that had been buried for years, parts that until then she swore they would never wake up again. From the bottom of the small suitcase, she pulled out a small box of dark wood, already worn out by time. It smelled of cedar, and kept what was left of the life Linda had had before the waters took it all away. Carefully, she opened the lid, revealing 3 portraits inside. The one of her daughter smiling with a missing tooth, the one of the christened man in a borrowed yellow dress, and the last one, the most painful image, a photo taken days before her death, still in the hospital, where the girl's eyes seemed to cry for help that no one heard. Her name was Valentina, 5 years, a medication error at El Paso's public hospital. One more dose, a distracted nurse, a life interrupted. Linda has never sued anyone, not because he was not entitled, but because I didn't have the strength. He buried his daughter with the money from church donations and never used his own name firmly again. It was as if a part of her had stayed on that simple tombstone under the merciless Texas sun. There, in the basement of a wealthy mansion, she held that photo to her chest and whispered words in Spanish that only grieving mothers know. He prayed not for justice, but for courage. Dam fuerzas, mi niña, to take care of them, as I could not take care of you. She knew she couldn't change the past, but it could prevent neglect, coldness, and silence from killing in another way. And it was there, kneeling on the floor, among boxes of produce and the smell of disinfectant, that Linda's mission became clear. She wasn't in that house just to earn her bread. She was there to honor her daughter, not to allow 2 more children to be treated as numbers, as reports, as burdens. And you who are watching, if you've made it this far, you need to keep going, because what is about to happen, it will reveal a truth that has been buried for far too long. Sometimes the greatest strength is not in the grand gestures, but in the small choices of those who have already lost everything, and yet decide to love again. The next day, Linda prepared coffee earlier than usual. I wanted to be upstairs before any other staff arrived. He passed through the door of the girl's room and heard inside a rare sound, a laugh. She was weak, shy, but she was there, a sound of childhood. He entered slowly and saw Harper and Haley sitting on the floor, playing with dolls. Harper's doll wore a piece of cloth tied as an apron. "It's you, Linda," the girl said. Her smile was short, as if she was still testing whether she could be happy without being punished for it. Linda knelt down, took an elastic band and tied the doll's hair in a messy bun. Now, yes, ready to work. The moment was interrupted by Evelyn's firm voice, which came from the corridor in long steps. Linda quickly got up and returned to her post, but the girls followed her with their eyes, as if they knew something was about to change. Evelyn walked into William's office with a red briefcase in her hands. Inside, a letter addressed to the Collins family trusteeship, suggesting the immediate removal of employee Linda Alvarez for emotionally inappropriate and possibly manipulative behavior. William read it all in silence. His eyes were heavy, as if the vigil of the last few nights was taking its toll. But there was something Evelyn didn't expect. In the corner of the table rested a copy of the footage of the cuddle night. Someone had left it there. No ticket, no explanation. Just the naked truth in images. He watched the recording right there, in front of the doctor, and for a moment, Evelyn felt that the control she had been holding on to so much tooth and nail was slipping away. But William, as usual, said nothing. He just closed the portfolio. His silence was now the most dangerous terrain in the house. Hours later, Linda was cleaning the main entrance when she saw, outside, a black car parking. From inside, it came a man in a dark suit with a briefcase in his hands. He walked towards the door with determined steps. He was a lawyer, and she had in her hands documents that could change everything, including the life of the cleaning lady who they thought would never have a voice. The house was plunged into darkness when Linda climbed the stairs that night. The corridor seemed longer, denser, the kind of silence that didn't scare, but respected. He stopped before the half-open door of the girls' room, where a soft light escaped in thin strips through the gap. Inside, no sound, no crisis, no crying, only the light breathing of two children finally at peace. Linda didn't get in. He didn't want to break the spell of that rare moment. He just leaned his forehead against the wood of the door and whispered, with a soul full of faith, "Duerme, mi niña, duerme, mi amor." The words floated in the air as blessing. Inside, Harper slept hugging the bear with the brooch, Haley with the doll on her lap. No medicine that night, no appliance turned on, no shouting from Evelyn, only the invisible presence of someone who cared with truth. Hours later, the nanny who was on duty at dawn looked at the camera monitor in shock. "They slept all night," he mumbled as if he couldn't believe it, and in fact, it was not to be believed. Not even the strongest medicines had achieved that. But there they were, quiet, serene, breathing in sync as if they had finally found a safe place in the world. William watched everything in the office. The video had no cuts, no tricks. It showed Linda standing in the doorway, her voice low, the words in Spanish, the silence afterwards. He stared at the screen for long minutes. His impassive face began, little by little, to show cracks, a doubt, a discomfort. Something inside him wanted to understand, but he also feared. Because to understand what Linda did with the girls would be to admit that everything he had been ignoring, perhaps it was what they needed most. Evelyn, when confronted with the recording, took a deep breath and threw her body weight against the chair. Hypnotic suggestion caused by intense emotional exposure. Trauma responds like that sometimes. She spoke as someone who needs to appear to own the truth, even when everything screams the opposite. It's temporary. It's unstable. It's dangerous. But even she didn't believe in her own words anymore. Linda, that morning, went down to the basement without haste, the body tired, but the heart light. That night, it had been a silent miracle, as if Valentina from heaven had caressed the girl's sleep for her. She sat on the mattress and closed her eyes for a few seconds, trying to keep that feeling. For the first time, she felt that she was managing to fulfill the mission that she never had the chance to complete with her own daughter. And it's at this point in the story that we need to stop for a second, because there are pains that only those who live understand. There are silences that scream inside us for years. Linda carried a grief that no one saw, but that shaped her every gesture. And even without recognition, without a diploma, without permission, she went there and offered what was purest in her, care. Tell me, have you ever felt it? Have you ever held a pain in your chest and still chose to take care of someone? Comment here. Tell me. I understand. I've been there. What strength. Sometimes just knowing that we are not alone. It already changes everything. Up there, however, the mood was beginning to change. Evelyn went around in circles, calling colleagues at the university, trying to put together a speech that would shield her. He knew something was slipping through his fingers, and it wasn't just control over the treatment. It was respect. William had begun to listen to her with less reverence. The nannies murmured among themselves, and the girls. Now they called for Linda, not for her. Deep down, Evelyn wasn't afraid of Linda as a person. I was afraid of what it represented. Because if a humble cleaning lady, without a lab coat, without a curriculum, was able to cure what science failed, then everything Evelyn had built would fall apart, and she wasn't willing to allow that. The next morning, Linda was sweeping the foyer when she saw Evelyn come downstairs with her phone to her ear and an expression she knew well. It was the look of someone who was already planning a coup. She felt it in the air, the smell of war approaching. But before she could react, William quietly called her into the office. When she entered, he was alone, the television turned off, the red folder on the table. "Linda, sit down, please." She felt her heart race. His hands were sweating, but he sat down. She always sat down when she was called upon, whether to be accused, corrected, or dismissed. William looked into her eyes as if he saw someone real for the first time. "You're not just a cleaning lady, are you?" Linda took a long time to respond, not because I didn't know what to say, but because he didn't know if it was safe to say. But before she opened her mouth, he added, "I need to know what happened to you, because what you did here, it changed everything." What exactly did he want to know? How far would that conversation go? And what Linda was about to reveal, would it be enough to save those girls, or would it seal her own fate? The morning started like the others, or so it seemed. The autumn sun blew through the stained glass windows of the Collins mansion and created golden flecks on the marble floor. Linda, kneeling with the thick bristled brush in hand, cleaned the corners of the main staircase. He did his job as usual, silently, attentively, as if the ground was saying something that no one else heard. But that morning, there was a noise behind the routine. Something in Evelyn's hurried steps, something in the whisper among the lawyers in William's office. She felt it in the air, the kind of vibration that precedes tragedy. Later, while carrying the trash from the office bathroom, Linda noticed a crumpled envelope among the papers. It was thick, with a medical timbre at the top. Before throwing it into the larger laundry basket, something caught his eye. The date of the report was marked as recent, but the name of the professional in charge sounded familiar. Dr. Marjorie Hale. Linda frowned. That name. Yes, she remembered him. The nanny had commented months earlier about a renowned therapist in the area who had died suddenly in a car accident. She had been well respected in the field, and, according to the nanny's account, her death had moved the entire children's mental health network in Boston. With her heart racing, Linda hid the envelope between the clean cloths and headed straight for the service wing. There, in silence, he opened it completely and read it line by line. The document stated that Harper and Haley showed consistent signs of early psychotic disorder and recommended a preventive hospitalization in a private clinic in rural Vermont. The technical terms, the long paragraphs, the stamp at the end, everything seemed legitimate. But for Linda, that signature, it was a lie with the smell of expired medicine. Later, in a moment of apparent normalcy, she pulled the nanny to a corner of the kitchen and asked, almost whispering, "Do you remember Dr. Marjorie Hale?" The nanny nodded. "Of course. She was brilliant, but he died last year." "Why?" Linda showed the envelope, still hidden inside a plastic freezer bag. The nanny covered her mouth with her hand when she recognized the contents. "My God, this is a recent report. But if she died..." They didn't need to say anything else. The scandal hadn't broken out yet, but the truth had already begun to move inside the house, like a nagging secret that threatens to climb up the walls. Evelyn had forged a document, and worse, he was using this document to convince William to authorize the hospitalization of the girls, to get them away from the house, to get them away from Linda, silence them. In the living room, while sipping a cold tea, Evelyn calmly handed the report to the girl's father. The speech was technical, grounded, filled with terms that any parent in despair would not dare to question. "You saw the result, William. They are stabilizing on the outside, but internally, the symptoms are just migrating. It is common at this age. Childhood psychosis needs to be treated with distance from the generative environment." William looked at the paper suspiciously. "Withdrawal," he murmured. "Do you want to get them out of the house?" "No, I want to protect them," Evelyn replied, resting her hand on his. "Sometimes we need to make unpopular decisions to save what matters. I know it's hard, but you trust me, don't you?" The doubt was subtle, but it had already settled like a crack in the wall of his convictions. And meanwhile, Linda was in the basement, sitting on the edge of the bed, with the false report in hand, and her heart tightened. I knew I had to do something, but what? She had no power, no allies, no voice. He only had the truth, and even the truth, in a world made of titles and influence, was easily swallowed by a stamp. Night fell. The girls slept peacefully again, lulled by the same old song. But outside the door, Evelyn had already blurted out a poisoned phrase, "Tomorrow, it all begins." Linda listened, even though she didn't know, felt. And something inside her warned, if she didn't act soon, she would lose the girls forever, because the real madness in that house. He didn't live in the children. But how to expose such a well-armed lie? How to prove that the truth lives in the cleaning lady that no one listens to? And wouldn't Linda end up awakening even darker forces within that mansion by trying to protect those girls? The key slowly turned in the old lock, with a creak that echoed through the mansion, as if the house itself had held its breath. It was the first time that door had opened since the death of Amanda Collins. The private office of the millionaire's wife was at the back of the library, behind a sliding shelf, an elegant and gloomy space filled with hardcover books, gilded frames, and a dormant scent of floral perfume and antique wood. William had given the order. "You can clean everything. We will donate what is left." But for Linda, it wasn't just accumulated dust. It was a sanctuary. She walked in slowly, with the bucket in one hand and the cloth in the other. Every object there seemed to touch a nerve. There were nail marks on the wood of the desk, a glass with dry lipstick on the rim, a shawl folded over the armchair. Everything is frozen in time. All as if Amanda was still going to come back. While dusting the bookshelf, one of the books fell, a Bible with a dark cover worn in the corners. As he opened it to put it back in place, an envelope fell from inside, sliding to his feet. It was a letter, written by hand, blue ink, yellowed paper. At the top, the date, 2 months before Amanda's death. "If you're reading this, it's because something stopped me from talking. I've tried to warn William, but he trusts her too much. Evelyn is manipulating everything. The girl's medicines were changed without my consent. My diaries disappeared. She smiles at me as if she wants to protect me, but I feel like I'm being studied, dismantled, turned into an obstacle. If something happens to me, look at it. It was no accident." "Amanda!" Linda felt a shiver rise up her back. His hands trembled. He read and reread each line. That wasn't just a distrust. It was a silenced scream. Amanda had left a clue, a cry for help, hidden within faith itself, and now, in the hands of a cleaning lady. She took out her old cell phone, with the cracked screen and the blurry camera, and took pictures of the letter. Every word had to be kept. Then he folded the paper carefully, and put it back in the exact place where it was. That was more than a test. It was the voice of a woman that everyone tried to silence. And you who are listening to me now, if this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think, because sometimes all someone needs is to be heard, even if they're already gone. In the days that followed, Linda watched Evelyn with different eyes. Every gesture of the doctor now seemed rehearsed, every word a trap, and more than ever she felt that the girls were in danger. The internment plan was gaining strength. William hesitated, but he had not yet made a decision, and Evelyn knew it. That's why he smiled more. That's why he offered coffees and touches on the shoulder. She was a manipulation scientist. And Linda, alone with her floor cloth and an old cell phone, was the only real obstacle in front of her. One night, Linda snuck back into the office when everyone was asleep. I needed to look for more. Something inside her said that Amanda had not just written a letter. He rummaged through drawers, fiddled with the folds of his shawl, examined the cracks in the desk. And then, behind the family picture frame, she found a smaller envelope. In it, a newspaper clipping, a discreet headline: "Patient with a psychiatric history sues Dr. Evelyn Carter for improper medication." The case had been shelved for lack of evidence, but the name of the clinic and the lawyer were there. That was a trail, and each step made everything more dangerous. Because now Linda knew too much, and on the other side of the mansion, Evelyn was beginning to suspect. The tension tightened in the air like a violin string. All it took was one wrong move, one more word, a slip. But the question that kept coming out of Linda's head was only one. Did Amanda really die, or was it silenced? The accusation fell like a blade in the middle of the morning. Evelyn went downstairs to the second floor with Amanda's letter in her hands, her eyes burning with suppressed fury. Her voice echoed throughout the house, like thunder dressed in elegant words. This woman violated Amanda's sacred space. He invaded the office without authorization. It is spreading lies, interfering in the treatment of girls, manipulating fragile and emotionally unstable children. Linda tried to explain, but her voice, low and choked, didn't pierce Evelyn's shield, nor did William's emotional armor, who stared at the ground as if he'd rather ignore the truth than face what it would mean. "She stole it, William," insisted Evelyn. "He took documents, he searched belongings. He's delirious. It needs to be removed before it causes irreversible damage." William took a deep breath. He did not look up. "I just said, 'You're dismissed, Linda. Please pack your things.'" Dumb, and so it was. No chance of defense, without the right to a voice. With trembling hands, Linda went down to the basement, where she folded the few clothes she had, put away the cell phone with the photos of the letter, and tied everything inside a torn grocery bag at the handles. As she climbed back, ready to leave the house where for weeks she had felt it finally made sense to exist, she heard footsteps running down the hallway. "Beautiful!" The children's voices tore through the silence. Haley and Harper, their faces red from crying, walked down the stairs without shoes, clinging to the cleaning lady's legs as if their world was falling apart. "It's not going away. Please, take us with you," Haley begged between sobs, and Harper just squeezed the teddy bear Linda had sewn days before. Private security guards, cold as stone, approached. They took Linda by the arms with forced kindness, tearing her away from the children. And as the screams of the girls echoed through the main entrance, the door closed with a dry crash. Linda was put in a black car, sitting in the back seat like a criminal, with the bag on her lap, and her soul in pieces. No one defended it, no one questioned it, no one wondered why two children screamed for a cleaning lady as if they were losing the only person who could still see their hearts. 2 hours later, Linda re-entered the basement of the Latino church in the Roxbury neighborhood. The same basement where she had slept in the weeks before being hired by the agency. It was small, smelling of melted candle and damp brick. Next to the wooden cross nailed to the wall, a donated mattress awaited his tired body. There, no one asked where she came from. There, she was just one more woman in silence, among many who had already lost everything. That night, he knelt in the corner where the streetlight could barely reach. His wrinkled hands joined in prayer, but her voice was no longer firm. She trembled like someone who no longer knew if she was being heard. "If it be thy will, give me strength. But if it's for me to disappear, at least take their peace with me." And it is at this point that we ask ourselves, how many women have been silenced, not because they shout too much, but because they feel too much? How many times has the world expelled those who cared the most? Stay here with me, because what's next? It will reveal secrets that should never have been buried, and maybe, for the first time, someone will have to pay for everything. The cold of Boston seemed sharper that Sunday morning. The windows of the church's basement let through a pale light, and the smell of reheated coffee mingled with the incense that still hung in the air since the first Mass. Linda folded the altar cloths with the same concentration with which she cleaned the corridors of the Collins mansion. His eyes were sunken, marked by sleepless nights, and a silence that weighed more than any accusation. He still carried his old cell phone with the photos of Amanda's letter in his purse, but now that seemed little compared to what he faced, until, in a familiar whisper, he heard his name, Beautiful. She turned slowly and saw Sueli, the Brazilian nanny, standing at the door of the sacristy with an anxious look, and her hand closed around something. He wore a coat that was too big and eyes teary with anguish. The two embraced each other without saying a word, like women who had already cried together in silence, even separated by walls. "I know what they did to you was unfair." "I know," said Sueli, taking a small USB stick wrapped in adhesive tape from her pocket. "There's something here that you need to see." Linda frowned, picked up the object carefully. Before you were fired, I copied the files of the internal cameras that Evelyn had installed, including the videos that she thought no one else saw. They're all here. Her tearing up Haley's drawing, her increasing the dosage of medicines without authorization, yelling at the girls while no one was looking. Until the day you sang Haley to sleep, it's all recorded. Linda's heart raced. For a second she felt her legs fail. He sat down on one of the benches in the chapel and squeezed the USB stick between his fingers. "Why didn't you give me this sooner?" he whispered. "Because I was afraid. But now I see that you are the only one who can do something. Amanda once told me that she was feeling doped. I thought it was an exaggeration. But after you showed up, it all started to make sense." Linda put her hand to her chest. The memory of the letter, of the words written by Amanda with so much despair, was now mixed with Sueli's revelation. Evelyn was not just an arrogant doctor. She was a dangerous woman, and maybe murderous. That same afternoon, Linda sought out the only man she still trusted, Father Michael. He received her in the church's small counseling room, where a wooden crucifix and a cup of dried flowers decorated the table. "I know I can't do justice alone, Father, but the Lord knows someone who can show the truth to the world." Father Miguel listened attentively, looked over the files of the pen drive, and, after a few minutes of silence, raised his firm gaze. "There's a journalist here in Boston, Juan Herrera. He has already covered complaints in psychiatric clinics, knows the ways, and he is not afraid to face big names. I'm going to call him now." And it was there, in that small church basement, with the smell of candles and old dust, that the first pieces of truth began to fall into place. A homeless cleaner, a silenced nanny, a community priest, and a discredited journalist, all moved by a pain that no longer fit in silence. At night, alone on the thin mattress, Linda looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "Amanda, if you still listen to me, you give me strength. Guide me. Because what I have in my hands now, it can destroy a lot of things." And that's when I need to tell you, Linda's story is far from being just about injustice. It's about courage hidden in people that no one sees. And if you've come this far, it's because maybe, deep down, you also feel that the world needs to change. So follow me, because in the next few days, what was buried a long time ago, it will come to the surface with a force that neither money nor silence will be able to stop. But is Linda prepared for the price she will pay for this truth? The city slept in silence on that cold Sunday, but inside thousands of homes, the screens shook. At 9 p.m., punctually, the Boston Public Eye special broadcast went on the air with a dry vignette and the sound of a rapid heartbeat. In the center of the screen, journalist Steve Delacroix, known for diving into mud where few dared to tread, adjusted the microphone and stared firmly at the camera. On the other side, in modest apartments, in mansions closed with thick curtains, in bars, living rooms and basements like Linda's, the eyes were fixed on the screen. Today, we are going to show what happens when power meets silence, and when the silence finds someone who still has the courage to speak. The first images showed the facade of a well-known mansion in elite Beacon Hill. Amanda Collins's face smiled in archival videos next to the little twins. The narrator's voice was soft, but loaded with tension. A rich woman, a sudden death, 2 children diagnosed with severe disorders, and a doctor with an untouchable reputation linked to a network of psychiatric clinics that makes millions. Afterwards, blurry excerpts of videos from the mansion's internal cameras were shown, the children's drawing being torn by the hands of a woman identified only as an expert, the muffled screams, the children huddled in the corner. And then the moment that would hold everyone's breath, a female voice with a soft accent reading a letter. "If you're reading this, it's because something stopped me from talking." It was Amanda. The entire letter was read on state television. Her distrust of medication manipulation, the feeling of being watched, silenced. The last words, "If something happens to me, look at her. It was no accident," were followed by a silence that seemed to last longer than any commercial. The image returned to the studio. Steve Delacroix took a deep breath. There was more. We have received exclusively documents that show the name of a therapist who has been dead for more than a year being used in recent reports. Altered exams, fabricated reports, children medicated without legal supervision, and all under the eyes of an elite that prefers to trust degrees rather than people who see what happens when no one else is looking. And then, the question. That question that would cross the entire country like a whisper that turns into a scream. How many cleaners see what the rich ignore? At the Collins mansion, William sat on the leather sofa, glass of whiskey between his fingers. But he didn't drink. The television seemed to swallow all the air in the room. Evelyn entered through the side door, pale, her eyes fixed on the screen as if she expected everything to be disproved in the last seconds. But it wasn't. Social networks exploded. Elas vim tudo, Carta de Amanda, Dr. Evelyn. The names began to circulate, even though they had not been said. Speculation became a certainty. People knew, felt, they connected the dots. Boston's Latino community rose up like a wall of voices. Women who had previously worked at the same cleaning agency began to comment. Other mothers shared stories of children diagnosed too early, over-medicated, too quiet, and all in some way spoke of her. Beautiful. In the basement of the church, she was surrounded by worshippers who had stopped everything to watch. Some were crying, others embraced her. Father Miguel held her hand firmly. You were the one who gave her a voice, daughter. Amanda. But Linda just shook her head, still in disbelief. His image did not appear, his name was not mentioned. But everyone knew. She was now the invisible woman who exposed an empire. Outside, on the dark sidewalk, a press van was already waiting. The world was about to knock on his door. But inside the mansion, an even deeper silence began to spread. A different silence. The silence of those who begin to fear what is to come. Because if the truth came out, what else can be hidden under the expensive carpets of Beacon Hill? The parish hall smelled of hot broth and stale bread. It was Monday, and the wooden benches were occupied by men and women who, in the eyes of the world, were also invisible. Linda served soup with her sleeves rolled up and an apron stained with tomatoes and hope. The steam from the pan rose like a prayer. Her face, despite the fatigue, carried a serenity that was born of those who, even hurt, did not allow themselves to be corrupted. It was when the heavy door of the church opened with a creaking noise that made the murmur of the faithful fall silent. William Collins entered with a dark overcoat and a look that mixed shame, doubt and a pain that he himself could not name. He stopped for a few seconds on the doorstep, as if asking permission to step on that floor. Linda looked up slowly, and everything around seemed to freeze. It was him, the man who allowed the truth to be stifled, that she believed the lie, even when the cry of her daughters said otherwise. William walked up to her with restrained steps. He took off his coat, not knowing where to leave it, and held his hat in his hands. I saw the interview yesterday, he said, his voice lower than usual. I heard the letter, I saw the images, and I understood everything that I refused to see. Linda did not immediately respond. She continued stirring the soup for a few seconds, until she turned off the stove and faced the man head-on. Her eyes, dark and deep, seemed to see through him. Do you want soup? He asked simply. William almost smiled, but he didn't have the courage. I want answers. I want to know why. Why did you do that, Linda? Why did it go so far for 2 children who are not even yours? She took off her apron slowly, folding it calmly. Then she approached until she was a few steps away from him. Because no one heard their crying, Mr. Collins. And I recognized the sound of a wounded soul. Because I was once one. Because my daughter also screamed at night, and no one listened. Because when I saw those 2 trying to sleep, hugging each other in heavy silence, I understood that if I did nothing, they might never wake up in one piece again. William swallowed. His eyes were red, but he didn't cry. He was a man used to containing everything, even when he bled inside. "I'm sorry," he murmured, "for not having seen it, by having let that happen inside my house." Linda took a deep breath. He scanned the line of homeless people still waiting for their turn in the soup. Then he looked back at him. "Excuses are easy, forgiveness is hard, and even when it happens, it does not erase what has already been done. Harper and Haley have marks that may never go away. Amanda died crying for help, and I was sent away like garbage." William lowered his head. There was no more defense nor arguments, just silence, that uncomfortable silence of someone who knows he made a mistake, but there is no way to go back in time. They stood there for too long a moment, between looks that said more than 1,000 words. "So what can I do?" he asked, almost in a whisper. How do I fix it?" Linda moved one step closer, and he said with a serene firmness, "Listen to the girls. No remedy, without translation. Listen with the heart, and if you want to start changing something, start asking for forgiveness from them." At that moment, a lady interrupted, touching Linda's shoulder gently. "The soup has cooled down, my daughter." Linda nodded, went back to the stove and turned the flame back on. William remained there, motionless. Then he sat down in the last pew of the church, without saying anything else, staring at the altar, as if waiting for some answer to come from above. And as the steam rose again from the pot and the voices began to resume quietly around, something inside that man began to crumble. Because he finally understood what was at stake was not his reputation. It was the soul of the daughters. But what would he do with this truth? It was still a mystery. After all, not every man who is silent has learned to listen. And sometimes silence precedes the storm. The Boston sky was grey that Wednesday morning, as if even time had bent to the gravity of what was about to happen. The Collins mansion, once a symbol of silence and control, was now watched over by drones and flashes. At the entrance, reporters jostled each other in search of a statement that would not come, because it wasn't the cameras that screamed now. It was the documents, the videos, the altered exams, and the names that Evelyn tried to hide were, one by one, being read aloud by prosecutors and investigators. In the extraordinary bulletin shown live by the state broadcaster, the special prosecutor in the case spoke firmly. "Dr. Evelyn Carter will be formally indicted for the crimes of medical fraud, irregular administration of psychotropic drugs, and attempted emotional manipulation of minors. There are indications that the Hope Bridge Clinic, which she co-founded, has embezzled more than $6 million in the last 4 years. William Collins' name was mentioned, not as an accomplice, but as part of a circle that ignored signs. He watched everything in silence, from the TV room that was previously used only for entertainment. Now, every inch of that house seemed to echo questions he couldn't answer. But the final blow came from where no one expected, from the children's court. Harper and Haley, accompanied by forensic psychologists, were called in for a special deposition, a protected wiretap, where they could speak without fear, with drawings, simple words, and memories still warm. The session was confidential, but part of the content was leaked by the prosecutor's office itself as a way of raising awareness. She said that our mother was on another plane, that if we didn't keep quiet, she would never come back. She told us to stop drawing. He said that sad children should take medicine. She yelled at Haley when she asked if she could hear Mommy's voice. The reports did not come with hatred. They came with that trembling coldness of someone who still doesn't fully understand what he suffered, but feels, deep in his chest, that it wasn't love. Social networks reacted like a fire in a dry field. Evelyn was cancelled, chased away, unmasked. Photos of her smiling next to politicians and businessmen disappeared from the pages. Websites once aligned with the elite now published headlines with harsh words: "Doctor of Silence, the industry of childhood sadness, when the medicine is the lie." In the basement of the church, Linda received the news with moist eyes and a restless heart. It was not joy that she felt. It was relief, but also an old pain that went up in his chest. The certainty that, if they had listened to his daughter years ago, perhaps the ending would have been different. She knelt in the corner before the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe and closed her eyes for a moment. "Thank you," she whispered, "but take care of them now, because my hug, it's not there yet." Father Miguel approached slowly. "The girls asked about you yesterday. They want to know if he will come back." Linda smiled small. "It's not time yet." On the other side of the city, while the federal police sealed files in Evelyn's office, an unprecedented feeling spread among people who had never felt seen. Cleaners, nannies, cooks, caregivers, mothers, women who always knew more than they were asked. Women who, in the silence of their work, saw scenes, heard phrases, perceived abuse, but never had anywhere to scream. And now one of them had made the world listen. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. So, if this story is touching something inside you, enjoy this video and subscribe here to the channel. This makes more difference than you think, because sometimes what heals a silence, it is knowing that he is no longer alone. But as Evelyn's fall shook the corridors of power, something still lurked in the corners of that mansion. Something that had not been shown. A secret kept on the top floor, and a voice that finally was about to be heard, because not all grief is silence, and not every death. It's the end of the story. The gate to the Collins mansion opened slowly, as if the structure itself hesitated to let this woman with slow steps and steady gaze pass. Linda climbed the stone staircase with a heavy heart, but not out of fear. It was as if he were returning to a place where part of his soul had been left, as if he were returning to an old room, already knowing that something there will no longer be the same as before. William was waiting for her at the door, this time without a suit, without pomp, just an ordinary man, with his sleeves rolled up and a guilt that now tried to be transformed into a gesture. He didn't say much. He just made room with his body and made a slight nod with his head, as if recognizing the greatness of those he had previously despised. Linda entered. The smell of the house was different. There was no longer the cold, controlled scent of industrial lavender, nor the sound of Evelyn's heels echoing through the halls. The air was warm, like that of an inhabited home, and the silence that once weighed like stone now seemed to breathe. "I want to show you something," William said, guiding her up the second floor. The door to the girls' old room was ajar. When Linda looked, the shock came like an unexpected hug. The walls, once white and aseptic, were now full of life. Children's drawings, cutouts of colored stars, photos pasted with adhesive tape and phrases on cardboard. "You are enough. Mommy lives in the heart. Dreaming is also playing." In the corner of the room, a round rug housed musical instruments, a xylophone, a small keyboard, a flute. Harper was sitting there, strumming a simple melody. Haley read a book aloud to a doll sitting in front. The scene seemed to come out of a dream that had once been suffocated. Linda said nothing, but his eyes watered with the strength of someone who finally sees what he always believed possible. William approached slowly. "They ask for you every week. I thought it was fair for you to see that they really breathe now." In the cupboard, there were no more medicines. On the shelf, there were children's books and building games. On the ceiling, small fluorescent dots formed constellations. The old hidden camera was no longer there. In its place, an amber light enveloped the environment like an invisible blanket. "After it all came to light," William continued, "I understood that this house, it was a tomb. And you were the only one who saw that. No degree, without power, only with truth." Linda looked at him, not with spite, but with that firmness that only the humble understand. Love doesn't need a title, just courage. The girl's new psychologist, appointed by Swaley, worked with art, stories, and music. No invasive exams, no cold diagnoses. The girls were in process, of course. There were still difficult nights, unanswered questions, hidden tears, but now they knew they could talk. And more than that, They knew that someone would listen, and sometimes everything a child needs, it is to be heard. As she watched Haley laugh over a funny rhyme in the book, Linda felt the weight she was carrying on her chest ease. It was not the end of pain, but it was perhaps the beginning of peace. Outside, the garden was in bloom. The rose bushes, once neglected, had been pruned and reborn. Sueli said that everything in that house seemed to have breathed again, and Linda, even from afar, felt that she had left something planted there, something invisible but powerful. If you've made it this far with us, because the most beautiful thing about this story is yet to happen. Because sometimes the miracle isn't what changes the world, it's what changes the heart. And the heart of that house. He still kept one last secret. Linda was about to discover something that would change her own story, something left in the corner of a trunk, a letter, a signature, a truth that no one expected. Because when you clean a house with love, sometimes what the pain tried to hide is revealed. The request came with the same respectful silence with which William now approached her. No empty promises, no rehearsed speeches, just truth. It was late afternoon when he appeared again at the church, where Linda distributed fruit to single mothers who came for support. He waited for her to finish cleaning the worn wooden counter, wash her hands, take off her apron. And then, with teary eyes, he said, "They need you, Linda." And so did I. She did not respond immediately. She sat next to him on the benches in the communal dining hall. The sun filtered through the stained windows of the church, dyeing the floor orange and gold. There, in that shared silence, he explained. She had stepped down from the presidency of the pharmaceutical conglomerate to take care of the girls full-time. But she knew there were things that only Linda's heart could reach. Things that he, with all his fortune and education, would never understand. I want you to be their legal guardian while I rearrange everything. And more than that, I want him to have the structure to continue doing what he does. I offer you a house, living wage, and freedom. Because I know that your place is where your heart beats, and it pulsates for more people than just my family. Linda felt a tremor in her spine. It was as if her life, for so many years compressed between squeegees, cloths, and silences, was gaining voice. I don't want to become someone I'm not, she replied with the serene firmness of someone who carries life on her back. I don't want a mansion, nor red carpet. I want to remain in the basement of hope, but with room for more children to come and go in one piece. It was then that the idea was born, a community children's center within the church itself, supported by a revamped foundation, now renamed after his deceased wife, Amanda Collins. There, girls and boys with emotional traumas could play, eat, sing, draw, without the weight of cold diagnoses or hasty looks. Psychologists, yes, doctors, when needed, but always with respect, welcome, and humanity. The church gave up the space. The foundation funded the renovation. William has pledged to visit the project every week. Sueli would help in the organization, and Linda, even though she still recognizes herself only as a woman who heard a cry that no one heard, became a silent reference of dignity and compassion. The most moving was when Harper, in an afternoon of painting, drew a woman in an apron with angel wings. In the corner of the page, he wrote in crooked letters, "Beautiful, Mom likes you." The words stuck in the cleaning lady's throat for hours. She didn't cry there. He just held the drawing carefully, as if holding his heart back, and while the children's center gained color, sound, and purpose, Linda remained steadfast. I still cleaned, I still cooked, but now everyone saw it. And more importantly, everyone listened. If this story came to you and made something inside you move, it does not ignore. Because sometimes life just needs someone who doesn't pass right by. Let it stop. Let him see and listen. But there was one thing that even Linda didn't know. One last letter, a buried memory. Something left by Amanda, for her. Something that could change everything once again. Because true love, when sown in silence, flourishes where no one expects it. And in the back of the closet of the twins' old room, Something awaited her. The church was full, that Thanksgiving Eve. The wooden benches accommodated from ladies with white veils to young mothers with small children in their arms. The smell of roast turkey came from the communal kitchen, mixed with the soft cinnamon aroma of the pumpkin buns. There was low laughter, whispers among friends, and an energy of reconciliation that only dates like this bring. At the altar, next to the simple wooden crucifix, the microphone was waiting. And in the front seat, sitting in the cleanest floral dress she had, was her, beautiful. When Father Miguel announced his name, the church fell silent as if God breathed deeper. Linda stood up slowly, smoothing the fabric of her dress with trembling hands. He climbed the 2 steps of the altar as someone who carries the weight of all the steps that life has imposed on him. He stopped behind the microphone. He took a deep breath, and with a choked voice he said, "I am not a woman of speeches. My place has always been with the cloths, the squeegees, the corners where no one looks. But today they asked me to speak. So I speak to what I have, my heart." The audience barely blinked. I arrived in this city fleeing the water. Literally, my neighborhood was swallowed up by the flood and my story almost drowned with it. Here I found a job, a basement, and a different silence. A silence of pain that was not mine, but that I knew. Because a child's cry, even when contained, has the same sound anywhere in the world. He paused. His eyes, teary, stared at some point of the wall. And there, between the footer of wealth and the ceiling of arrogance, I listened. I heard 2 girls asking for help, not with words, but with the absence of them, and no one saw it. Nobody wanted to see it. Some faces were already discreetly wiping their eyes. William, sitting next to Sueli and the twins, kept his head down. I lost my daughter in a hospital, not because of illness, but because of neglect. I know what it's like to scream for help and be ignored. That's why, when I saw the fear in the eyes of those girls, I couldn't pass right by. I stopped, heard. I sewed a teddy bear, sang softly, prayed. Not because I am a saint, but because I'm a mother. Even without a lap, my chest still holds warmth. There was a collective sigh. And then, gently, she opened the small Bible she was holding and read, in a firm voice, Psalm 126, "Those who sow with tears will reap with joy." He closed the book, facing the audience. "I may never reap riches, but today I reap peace." And see Harper's smile, or Haley's hug. This is worth more than any check, because where there was pain, now lives love. Thank you. As she stepped down from the altar, the silence was broken by emotional applause. But what made everyone cry was not his speech. That's what came next. Harper and Haley walked hand in hand to her. Each one carried a small gift. Harper opened her hand and showed an antique silver brooch with small blue pebbles. It was his mother's. Linda recognized him from an old photo. Haley, in a shy voice, held out a colorful drawing. 3 hearts, side by side. On top of each one, names written in children's handwriting. Linda, Harper, Haley. She fell to her knees right there, her arms open, welcoming the girls in a hug that seemed to heal not only them, but all the pain that still lived inside her. And that night, in the community hall, the Thanksgiving supper took place like never before. There was no table separating rich and poor, businessmen and immigrants, doctors and the unemployed, the elderly and children, all sat side by side. The food was simple, but what satiated it was gratitude, laughter, forgiveness. Linda, with the brooch attached to her dress and the design neatly folded into her pocket, looked around with her eyes full, and I thought in silence that maybe, perhaps the miracle had never been the girl's sleep, nor the doctor's fall. Perhaps the real miracle would be another, but she still didn't know that at that very moment something unexpected was being prepared. An envelope, a name written in blue ink, and a revelation that would change everything. Because a mother's love, it never disappears. It just changes shape, and sometimes it reappears when no one else expects it. Today, Harper and Haley sleep peacefully. The old room, once filled with shadows and silence, is now home to stories read aloud, drawings pasted on the wall, and songs whispered without fear. The mansion, once cold as a mausoleum, now smells of fresh bread on Saturday mornings and lavender in curtains that dance in the wind. William, quieter and more present, learned that presence cannot be bought. It is earned. And Linda, the woman who walked through the service door with a small suitcase and a giant past, now walks through the house as part of the family, without losing the humility that has always been her greatest luxury. She is not a therapist, nor a saint, nor a martyr. It's just someone who stopped to listen to a cry that no one heard. And because of that, she saved 2 souls, and her own. Sometimes all the world needs is someone who sees inside. This story reminds us that courage is not about raising your voice, but about standing firm when everything around you tries to shut you up. That faith is not the absence of pain, but the choice to love in spite of it. And that dignity has nothing to do with a degree, but with compassion. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking with us. Your listening is a form of healing. And if this story touched your heart, leave a like. It's like a silent hug that strengthens our channel. If you want to stay with us, sign up. Here the coffee is always playing, and there's always a place at the table for you. Tell me in the comments, from which city are you watching this story? Let's put together this map of hearts spread across Brazil and the world, and it activates the bell so you don't lose it when the coffee is ironed again. Because there are still many stories like this waiting to be heard. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.